The first of the features I'd like to talk about is the enhanced live view. So first of all, let me just show you where that is in the menus. And if we just go into the main menus in the photo mode and we go to page 3, and you'll find it under live view settings right there. Just click that and just turn it, well, in this case, turn it off or turn it on, depending on how much light you have to work with. And the idea is that this will allow live view to work in much lower light levels. And you'll see some degradation of the image in the normal view when the light levels drop, and you'll start to see it basically getting quite dark. The enhanced live view mode boosts that signal colossally, in fact, to the point where it's like a light intensifying, and you can actually work in much lower light levels. So I've set up a little test basically in the dark where I've filmed something in the studio. So let me just cut to that and then we'll come back to me here. What you're looking at here is an external viewfinder that's plugged into my SL2-S. It's a bit bigger than the screen on the back of the camera and makes it easier for me to video it. This is me filming in the complete pitch black. I can't show you what I'm actually doing, you'll have to imagine it, but I'm pointing my SL2-S at an antique camera on a tabletop setup in my studio, and you'll see how clear the image is. It's quite remarkable. The exposure for a still would be 10 seconds at f2, so it's very dark in here. And watch what happens if I move the camera from left to right. Can you see how it does that kind of juddery, smeary movement? That's because it's struggling to feed a smooth video signal to the screen. If I magnify the view to focus, watch what happens as well. You see how dark it is? It's nice and smooth and I can see detail for focusing, but it is very dark. Now there'll be a big change when I go to the enhanced live view. So let me do that right now. Live view settings, enhanced live view on. You should see a little change in the histogram. There it goes. And now if I move the camera from left to right, it's perfectly smooth. None of that smearing and jerkiness at all. And when I magnify, it's massively brighter, as you can see. You will see some speckling of grain. That's because the signal is being very much enhanced, but you can see plenty of information there for critical focusing, and you can see a lot more information in those shadow areas. So for working in low light, this mode is quite superb. So I think you'll see it's quite a big change. And one of the really great circumstances in which you might use it is if you're working with those very strong neutral density filters to force long exposures, because they act by actually darkening the light that comes into the camera and therefore giving you a much longer shutter speed, like 60 seconds or even 2 or 3 minutes. So in those circumstances, focusing can be a bit problematic. Turn on enhanced live view and you'll have absolutely no problems. Another useful feature that's been introduced in firmware version 2.0 is the image overlay. What this means is that you can take a photograph on the SL2-S and then you can use that photograph to overlay over another photograph. It appears as semi-transparent, and that allows you to line up an older shot and a newer shot. Now, the example given in the manual is if you were shooting a time lapse and you wanted to do a time lapse of, let's say, a tree in 4 different seasons. And every 3 months you'd have to go back to that tree, you'd have to find where you set your tripod up, but then you would have to frame it exactly. This would allow you to take a photograph that you'd already shot and then use that, well, I suppose a frame from the previous time lapse, use that as a reference image to line up the shot precisely and then shoot the time lapse. And then you'd have 4 time lapses for 4 seasons all in register. It'd be very useful. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to explain how it works. But I want to make the point that first of all, you have to shoot a picture with the camera itself. You can't just create any old JPEG and copy it onto the card. It doesn't work like that. It has to be shot by the camera. But what this does allow you to do is to use a graphic photographed from the computer screen. Now I'm going to come back to that point in a sec. Let me just show you how the menus work. So let's go into the menus here. The option for image overlay is on page 4. Image overlay. If I click into that, it's off at the moment. Transparency is high. I find that to be the best setting. If you have this transparency set to low, it obscures the image too much. So you're seeing too much of the overlay image and not enough of what you're actually pointing the camera at. So I leave that on high. Then you get to choose the overlay image from whatever you've actually already photographed. So it has to be on the card and it has to be photographed by an SL2 or an SL2-S. I've not tested it with the other Leica cameras, but you can shoot with different cameras in the SL range and copy the images on and off the cards. As long as it's shot by these cameras, you can use the overlay itself. And then the last option here, which is important, is reset on turn off. That means that if I have it on, when I turn the camera off, the image overlay is turned off. You have to turn it back on again. If I leave this, if I have this off here, it means that the image overlay stays whether I turn the camera off or not. So if I turn the camera off and then I come back to turn it on again, that image overlay is still in the viewfinder. So if you're using it a lot, that might be useful. So coming back to my previous point, sometimes you need to shoot to a layout. Now, I know you can do this in the studio tethered using something like Capture One Pro. You can create a graphic and then you can use that as a layout overlay over the image so that you can frame the shot according to the required layout. Given that you must only use images shot by the camera, this camera, it occurred to me that if you make the layout in InDesign or Keynote or Photoshop or whatever you've got lying around, you could do it in Word, I suppose, and then you maximize it on the screen, remove all the surrounding menus and tabs. I mean, in Photoshop, hit the F key and it will remove the surrounds, and hit the tab key and it will remove the menu, the toolbar and everything like that. Keynote, you just play the Keynote, or PowerPoint, just play it on the screen. Take a photograph of it, being careful to line it up nicely with the edges so it fills the frame. It doesn't even have to be particularly sharp. You can just take the photograph just as a JPEG, whatever you want to do, and then you can use that. So I've created a little layout, just a little mock-up, and I'm going to show you how it would work in a studio shot. So here's a very simple setup. I'm photographing a vintage Leica camera for a specific magazine layout, and the designer has required that the background, this timber here, needs to extend across the whole image. And so I go into Menu, I go to page 4, Image Overlay, click that, choose Overlay Image, and I've got the transparency to high, which seems to be the best setting. Choose Overlay Image, and this is an image that I shot earlier. Tick that, and then tap the shutter button just to bring it back to the normal view, live view. And you can see now, this is my double page spread. There's where the text and the logo is going to go. But on the right hand page, because this is a 2-page spread, there's the gutter, which I want to avoid, otherwise the image can get sort of folded into that gutter and it spoils it. I can now place my subject exactly where I want it to be. And you can see how that works there, and then shoot accordingly. Now, if you were out in the field and you were photographing something, let's say you were photographing a flower for an article on flowers and you wanted text on this side, but the designer wanted the image to completely fill the image, like an out of focus background here and a sharp flower here. They wanted to use that out of focus background as a backdrop to the text. Then you can fill the frame and keep the proportions accurate and know that you're working accurately, and no more fancy post-production would need to be done. So the photograph is pretty much press ready. So that's image overlay. I think you'll find that could be very, very useful, particularly if you're shooting professionally and you have to work to layout. But even if you're not, it's a nice little tool to have tucked away in the menu there.